It's comeback season, baby. But it's not the comeback season you think. This comeback, not about accomplishing a new thing. It's not about leveling up any sort of skill. This comeback is about coming back to yourself. In a world that glorifies busyness and productivity and accomplishing the next thing and chasing the next thing, something that I think often gets neglected is rest and recovery, mentally and physically. Today we're going to be tackling the mental side of this. This episode is part 3 of the emotional fitness series, focusing on flexibility and recovery. We're going to be covering 3 topics today: emotional flexibility, rest and recovery, and using gratitude as recovery. The entire aim of this episode is to put that busy, productivity-focused mindset aside for a second and focus on just grounding yourself and coming back to the present moment and giving ourselves the kind of rest and recovery that we need in order to come back as our best selves, in order to allow ourselves to tackle all those other facets of our life in the best way possible. This is one of those things that I think can often get pushed to the back burner because it doesn't feel like it's as important as grinding and doing the work to accomplish those big goals. But without you prioritizing rest and recovery and without you making time for it, you are taking away from your ability to show up in all the other areas. So we're going to stop neglecting it today. Let's get into this.
Welcome to the Mindset Gym podcast, where we exercise your way of thinking to help unlock your hidden potential. I'm your host, Emily Irwin, a registered nurse and holistic nutritionist with a passion for all things health, fitness, and personal development. All right, let's get into it.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Mindset Gym podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We are over halfway through the emotional fitness series. I am really excited to be diving into another topic under this whole series umbrella with you. And like we've talked about before, the overarching theme of this entire series is that there are different facets of your mental well-being and your mental health that you can practice on and you can improve on, just like your physical fitness, just like building muscle in the gym. And this particular topic today, flexibility and recovery, there are also a lot of parallels as it relates to your physical health. Because rest, recovery, flexibility, all of these kind of things that require you to slow down, take a beat, and really focus on what your body needs over just kind of chasing the next goal. These are often the facets of our mental and physical health that tend to be neglected because they just don't feel like they have as much importance. It doesn't feel like they move the needle as much as you doing those other big tasks to chase your goal. The problem with this is that we don't realize that by putting our rest and our recovery on the back burner, we're hurting our ability to show up in other areas of our life, and we end up showing up a little bit worse than we would have otherwise. And it's funny, I think this is actually perfect timing for me to be talking about this topic. I didn't plan it out this way, but it just happened to be that the day I'm recording this episode was kind of a day where I had to put these kind of lessons into practice for myself. And so what led up to this is this past week at work, I obviously can't get into the details just because of confidentiality reasons, but this past week at work was exceptionally stressful, way more so than it typically is. And on top of that, I ended up getting sick for most of it. So all in all, just a lot more stress mentally and physically than I am typically accustomed to dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And it left me feeling extremely overwhelmed and burnt out. And I could feel it. I could feel that my ability to show up in other areas of my life the way that I typically want to, or just have the mental clarity in different areas of my life the way that I'd want to, it was just not there. And I could feel the stress from this past week taking a toll on other areas of my life. And so it was kind of a moment that forced me to prioritize my own rest and recovery. And so I had the day off today. Tuesdays are typically my kind of cardio day as it relates to my fitness gym schedule kind of thing. But I leave it as a little bit of a flex day. So in cases like this where it feels like I need something a little bit more chill, or if I'm wanting to try something new, this is kind of the flex day to throw things like that in. So we didn't do any cardio today. Instead, what I did was a hot hatha and meditation class. And so it was a hot yoga class that was focused on just like holding stretches and being present. And then the instructor kind of takes you through a guided meditation. And so it was kind of one of those rest and recovery moments for my body, but also for my mind, which relates a lot to what we're talking about today. And the instructor during the class talked a lot about, instead of constantly chasing the next thing, instead of constantly chasing the next goal, take a minute to just be present and appreciate where you are and appreciate how far you've come. And this really speaks to what we're talking about today. And so I left the class thinking, what great timing for me to be recording this episode for you guys, because not only do I get to share this information with you, I also get to implement it into my own life and see the benefits of that. Because even just having that day, having that time to, take the stress of this past week and kind of crumple it up and throw it away and let it go and start a little bit fresh and give myself that moment of reflection and grounding, and just having that minute made me feel so much better as I was leaving. I had a lot more mental clarity leaving that class and felt like I could, kind of go forward to the rest of my week in a better headspace than I would have been able to originally. So all those areas that we have a tendency to neglect are our rest, our recovery, our ability to be flexible, our ability to adapt and let go of the plan that we originally had for how any situation is going to go. Those are going to be our focus for today. We are going to focus on those kind of quieter mental skills that allow you to move through life in a way that keeps you grounded in yourself, keeps you present in the moment, and keeps those stressful external events from taking so much out of you. It allows you to kind of replenish that mental stock, if you will, so that you can continue to move through life without having pieces of your mental well-being just kind of slowly chipped away. This is your way of kind of rebuilding that store every so often so that you are able to be the best version of yourself. So the first topic we're going to be talking about today is emotional flexibility. Emotional flexibility is our ability to adapt to certain situations in a healthy and balanced way. So it is kind of the opposite of that really rigid way of thinking where, let's say you had a plan for how you wanted things to go, and for some reason or another, something interrupts that plan and things are not happening in the sequence that you thought they would be. And so someone who is in a really rigid way of thinking can let that interruption to their original plan just completely derail their day and completely derail their mindset. And I think this is something I've definitely been guilty of in the past, where I didn't have a whole lot of flexibility and I didn't leave really any space for things to go any way except the way that I had planned for them to go in my head. And this leads to a lot of frustration. And I found that a lot when I was struggling a lot to be mentally flexible and emotionally flexible. If I had a plan and one thing went differently than I had originally planned, I would get into a really bad mood about it, and I would let that kind of color the experience of my entire day. I would have a really hard time letting go of those negative feelings and continuing through my day in any sort of positive way. I found I really got stuck just kind of spinning my wheels in the whole thing's ruined now that it didn't go 100% according to plan. That's something I've really tried hard to work on, is when things don't go the way that I planned, when things don't go the way that I necessarily want them to, is having the ability to kind of stop and recognize that things are going differently than I wanted them to, but accepting it for what it is and not getting stuck ruminating in anger and frustration and letting that wreck the entire experience overall, because things can still be really good even if it's not exactly what you planned for. And I want to clarify that this is not you suppressing your emotions. This is not you having all these feelings and just not allowing yourself to feel them. It's okay to be frustrated when things don't go the way that you want them to. But there's better ways for us to manage that than just letting that anger and frustration take over our entire experience and not being able to move past it. Because if you lack emotional flexibility and you lack mental flexibility to work through those changes that come your way, that moment where things go differently than you planned can act as a huge roadblock, and that kind of stops you in your tracks, and that becomes the whole experience. The goal here is to maintain control over your emotions, be aware of how you're feeling, but start to take steps to manage them instead of overreacting or suppressing or just getting trapped in really negative, unhelpful feelings. I'll give you an example of this. So from this past week, like I talked about, I ended up getting sick, which meant I could not work out the way that I typically do. And on Monday this past week, I wasn't able to go to the gym at all, which is really out of the ordinary for me. That's something that's kind of been a staple in my day all the time. And so to not be able to do that sucked. Now, having that kind of rigid way of thinking would have allowed something like that to derail my entire day. And I would have got stuck ruminating in anger about not being able to go, ruminating in shame about not being able to go, and just beating myself up for not being able to do all of the things that I'm normally able to do. And that would have really ruined the experience of my day. Whereas having that mental flexibility in a situation like that allowed me to say, okay, I have to adapt my plan for today. I'm not up to doing what I'm typically up to doing, and that is okay. How can we adjust? How can I incorporate movement into my day that is something that I can still handle? And how can I give myself grace for not being able to show up in this particular way? And so instead of beating myself up for not being able to do this thing, I focused more on what I needed in that particular moment and allowed myself the space to show up differently. And kind of kept that mental dialogue with myself that me showing up differently based on different circumstances is okay. That's okay to do. I am not failing. The day's not ruined. My workout plan's not ruined. It's nothing I needed to panic about. And so just having that flexibility to be able to take those changes on and just roll with the punches makes them a lot easier to handle. And so this is a strategy we can implement anytime things go the way that we don't expect them to. And it doesn't just make the particular experience easier for us to handle, it actually improves our overall well-being, our ability to take on change and adapt our way of thinking and find ways to make it okay and find ways to move forward differently than we had originally planned actually improves our overall well-being. And this isn't just anecdotal, it is actually backed by research. There was a study conducted during the midst of COVID-19 in Turkey. The study was completed on adolescents using a validated emotional flexibility scale. The study showed that the adolescents that had a higher emotional flexibility score also had greater instances of well-being and resilience. Emotional flexibility can also help improve recovery from stress. A study out of Cambridge University found that patients dealing with psychosis who had more emotional flexibility and were able to better manage their emotions related to any sort of daily negative events that took place, recovered more quickly. So in other words, they were able to return to a normal baseline of functioning in a shorter time span than the patients who lacked emotional flexibility. So it's not just a nice to have, it's not just something that makes these situations a little bit easier. The repeated practice of being emotionally flexible and being able to adapt over time will improve your mental well-being. And this ties quite a bit into the discussion we had last week about resilience and our ability to adapt in times of stress and trauma and things like that, and being able to overcome those really big, really difficult moments of hardship. And emotional flexibility and resilience are two skills that kind of go together, but emotional flexibility is not something that you have to reserve strictly for the really big, awful moments in your life. Emotional flexibility is something you can practice all the time. Because life inherently is unpredictable. Life is not going to go according to plan most of the time. And it's not always in really big moments. Sometimes it's just the little day-to-day things that are going to trip up your plan and that are going to happen in a sequence of events that maybe you weren't expecting. I'll give you another example from just my day-to-day life that is a little bit of a smaller example, but paints a picture of how things don't always go according to plan. I am in a job where I see several patients every single day. I'm driving around house to house in the community. And something that I really don't like is being late. I'm someone who really values being punctual. And so in the mornings when I'm planning out my day and I'm planning out what I want my schedule to look like, I have kind of an ideal picture in my head of how all my visits are going to go. But obviously, it almost never goes that way. There is always some sort of hiccup in the day. Something happens with someone that I'm seeing that I haven't foreseen, and I have to stick around for longer, or there's more that I need to sort out. And that schedule that I originally had starting out my day is often never what the schedule ends up being at the end of the day. I often end up having to kind of adjust as I go and reframe what my day is going to look like. And so, again, this is something I struggled with early on when I was doing this job quite a bit more, was that when my original plan of this is what my day is going to look like, this is how long each of these tasks are going to take, this is where I'm going to be at this time, when all of that kind of started getting derailed, I would get really stressed and really overwhelmed, and I found it really hard to come down from that. And it would make the whole day feel really, really overwhelming. And so this has been something I've kind of continuously been trying to work on, because in the job that I'm doing, it's inevitable that my plan is going to get derailed, and I can't be punctual 100% of the time. Things are not always going to go according to plan. So I have this kind of talk with myself when I'm put in this situation, which is more often than not, of, okay, we need to be mentally flexible. We need to be willing to take these changes on. And instead of just, sitting in the stress and sitting in the anger and letting that be the whole mood for my day, how can we adapt? How can we fix this? How can I still, make this schedule as close to what I want it to be within the parameters of what is now going on? And that has been a big help in not allowing these hiccups to determine the entire quality of my day. And the thing with mental flexibility and emotional flexibility is that we are often much more capable of adapting than we may think. If you are someone who is used to having a really rigid way of thinking and having to adapt to change and having to course correct along the way, if that feels really overwhelming and really stressful for you to do, that's okay. It is going to be a process, just like a lot of things we've talked about in this series. It is going to be a continuous process of you showing up and practicing this thing and getting a little better. But you do have a larger capacity to do it than you may think. There's a quote on this topic that I really like from author Jodi Picoult, and she says that the human capacity for burden is like bamboo, far more flexible than you'd ever believe at first glance. You are capable of being much more flexible than you may realize, and it's something that is carried us through our entire evolution. The reason that we have thrived as a species is our ability to adapt and change and roll with the punches. There's another quote from Charles Darwin that says, "It is not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one most adaptable to change." So what can we do to improve our emotional flexibility? The first thing I want you to practice is using a mode of thinking called both and thinking. So instead of using really rigid either or statements in your thinking as it relates to anything, allow two things to be true at once. I'll give you an example of this. So let's say you are having to give a presentation in a meeting at work and you don't feel like you are capable of doing it. It's not a topic you've ever talked on before. You're really nervous to do it. That kind of either or thinking can be something along the lines of, I'm either capable or I'm not, and this is not something I'm capable of doing. Whereas using that kind of both and thinking is allowing two things to be true at once. You can be nervous, not feel like you're very confident in this particular area, but also have the ability to take that challenge on. And so we can use this kind of thinking when our schedule and when things get derailed and life forces us to be adaptable. Back to my example about work. When my schedule for work gets derailed, two things can be true at once. My schedule may have changed, but I'm still capable of making this day what I want it to be and showing up in the ways that I want to show up. That doesn't have to change just because my schedule has changed. The next thing I want you to do in order to help improve your emotional flexibility is that I want you to create some sort of ritual that you do whenever things get changed. Whenever things in life don't go according to plan and you're forced with a situation where you have to be emotionally flexible, it's likely going to bring on a lot of emotions. You might feel overwhelmed, you might feel stressed, you might feel angry, you might feel sad. I want you to create some sort of small ritual that you do in those moments to help bring yourself into the present moment and reframe your thinking. It could be something as simple as taking a few deep breaths before you decide how to react. It could be maybe keeping a journal on you at all times and just writing down a couple sentences about how you feel and taking a second to reflect on that. It could be having a small mantra that you say to yourself. Something that I found myself saying a lot this past week when things got really stressful and really difficult was, the way that things are right now is not the way they're going to be forever. And that helped me take a moment to not get stuck in the thick of the stress and start looking forward to a point in time where this would be better. And it kind of motivated me to start working towards a point in time when this would be better. And that helped me reframe my thinking to start looking for solutions, to start looking for ways to manage what was going on instead of just getting stuck in it. The last thing I want you to do is I want you to take time to reflect on really emotionally charged moments, because I think every single one of us can relate to situations where we should have been a little bit more flexible emotionally, and maybe we weren't. Maybe we were stuck a little bit in that rigid type of thinking and we overreacted, or we couldn't work through things in a productive way because we were just stuck ruminating in anger about it. So I want you to take a look at those situations, not to beat yourself up, not to punish yourself for how you reacted, but just think about it. Think about how you showed up. Think about why. Think about what emotions prompted you to act the way you did and think the way you did. And then start thinking about ways that you can change that. Reflecting on those moments after the fact when they're not so emotionally charged and not so heavy can make it easier for you to come up with strategies to manage them in a more productive way, and then practice those strategies moving forward. So again, going back to my experience this past week, now that that experience is over and I have kind of had time to settle and clear my head about it, I can start to reflect on how I showed up. How did I talk to other people? How did I handle that situation? Are there things about the way that I showed up last week that maybe I could change? Are there things that I could have done differently to make the whole experience a little easier on myself or easier on others? And so not just coming to the end of that really difficult thing and just saying, okay, well, it's over, we're done, move on. Take a beat and reflect on it and find the points where you could maybe be a little bit more flexible. So the next thing I want to talk about is rest and reset, and the need that we have to prioritize this in our kind of mental wellness routine. Because like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, it is something that can be so easily neglected. But I want to make it clear, rest is not a luxury. It is a biological necessity, mentally and physically. And I think to just kick this off is a simple mindset shift that I want us all to try and implement as it relates to rest and recovery. Rest is not something that you need to earn. You need it in order to perform at your best, and it's something that you need to schedule in just like any other obligation. I think we can often get caught up just chasing the next thing and wanting to do more and wanting to keep, accomplishing more things. And busyness can often be glorified, and it can make you look and feel more productive to just constantly have a full schedule and constantly be doing more and not taking time to rest, and that I'll sleep when I'm dead kind of mentality. But that's actually not the best way to get things done. That's actually not the most productive way to move through anything. You cannot show up as your best self if you don't take the time to rest. And so that's the first thing I kind of want you to work on under this umbrella, is starting to shift your mindset around rest and recovery, that it is just as important as you showing up and working on those big goals, as you working on any other mental and emotional skill. You prioritizing your rest and recovery is just as important. It's not some luxury thing that you can do if there's time. You need to make time for it. And I think sometimes when we think about rest, we think about sleep and just that kind of physical laying down, closing our eyes and taking time to rest. But there's more to it than just that. Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith categorized 7 different types of rest, and those are physical, mental, sensory, creative, emotional, social, and spiritual. There are so many different facets to our emotional well-being, and so many different areas that we need to prioritize rest. And the way that we implement rest for all of these things is going to look a little bit different. So having that sensation of burnout, which is a sensation that I think a lot of us encounter from one point to another, can sometimes be the result of only prioritizing that physical rest or sleep and neglecting all the other areas where rest is just as important, but you don't realize how to show up and how to make that type of rest a priority. There's a quote from Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith that says, "Rest is not just the absence of activity, it's the presence of restoration." And so checking off the list of those 7 different types of rest, physical rest I think is the most obvious one. Things that we can do to help prioritize that: getting good quality sleep, having some sort of restorative movement, so things like stretching and yoga, getting a massage, taking a few minutes to go for a walk in the middle of your workday, taking time to check in with how your body feels. For the other types of rest, the next one Dr. Dalton Smith talks about is mental rest. This is kind of that practice of giving your mind that reset from overstimulation and constant decision making and overthinking. Mental rest is kind of that practice of quieting down that mental chatter. And so some things we can do to prioritize this can include having a brain dump. So this could be, taking a few minutes and just writing down everything that's on your mind, anything that you're thinking you need to do, any feelings that you're having, anything at all. It doesn't have to be organized. It doesn't have to be pretty. Just put it all on paper. Just having that practice of taking all those things and getting them out of your head and having them in some sort of physical space. A nice little visual of this is as you're adding things to that brain dump, it kind of allows you to close off those mental tabs in your brain so you don't have a million tabs open at once. The next thing you can do is take scheduled mental breaks. So let's say you're doing something that is really mentally demanding. If you work an office job and you're working on the computer all day, scheduling time every hour, every 30 minutes, every 90 minutes, to just stop what you're doing and give yourself a few minutes of quiet to just kind of reset your focus and calm down the mental noise. We can also take time to do a mindfulness practice or meditation. And again, this doesn't have to be huge. This could be like a 30-second, 2-minute, 5-minute practice, just something small that you can add into your day here and there in order to give your mind a break to kind of just, mentally take a deep breath and refocus yourself. Something else we can do to help prioritize our mental rest is not multitasking. I think we all have a tendency to try and multitask as much as we can because we want to get as many things done at once, but this can become really overwhelming. And so something we can do to quiet down that mental noise and make things a little bit easier to take on mentally is just focus on one task at a time. You'll probably find that you actually get things done a lot quicker than you would if you're trying to do all of these things simultaneously. The next one is spiritual rest. Spiritual rest, this doesn't necessarily have to be something religious in nature. Spiritual rest is something that comes from feeling as though you're connected to something bigger, like you have a larger purpose outside of yourself. And so this is one of those things where if you don't have anything in your life that gives you that larger purpose, that makes you feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself, you can become kind of spiritually exhausted because you don't have any outlet to kind of feed that bucket. So things you can do to help support that. Having a gratitude practice can be a really simple one. Just focusing on small things throughout the day that you're grateful for and making that kind of your frame of mind can help you pick up on things that you have to be grateful for and can add a little bit of light to each of your days that you might have missed out on otherwise. Something else you can do, if you're religious and prayer is something that you practice on a regular basis, prayer can be something that can be helpful for your spiritual rest. If you're not, things like meditation or just reflection, just taking some time to reflect on events, to reflect on how you're doing, just kind of tune into how your headspace feels. Any of those moments of just taking a few minutes of pause can be extremely beneficial. Something else you can do is finding opportunities to help other people. So volunteering, finding ways for you to give back to other people, to the community at large, can give you that kind of sense of meaning and sense of purpose and sense of having a place in the world beyond yourself. And the last thing we can do is spending more time in nature and just reconnecting with the outdoors can help kind of create this sense of there being so much out there beyond just you and connecting with something larger than yourself. The next one Dr. Dalton Smith talks about is social rest. And I think we can all relate to moments of feeling socially exhausted and socially burnt out. I think we all have kind of a set bandwidth for social interactions, and sometimes without realizing it, we can go far beyond that bandwidth and feel just socially exhausted in a way that just, taking that kind of physical rest doesn't necessarily fix. So some things that we can do to prioritize social rest is seeking out authentic connections, seeking those really deep, meaningful connections with other people where it doesn't feel like a chore, it doesn't feel like a job to try and spend time with them. They are able to kind of see you and understand you for who you are. Having those kind of interactions with people can actually be really energizing and can actually charge your social battery more than drain it. I've heard this concept talked about before where certain people are vacuums and certain people are batteries. So depending on how these people understand you and communicate with you and how they communicate just with the world at large, some people can act as vacuums where they just kind of suck all your energy out and drain your social battery. And some people act as batteries, and you find yourself feeling really energized and really charged up and really happy to be with them. And you find that you actually have more energy after an interaction with them than you did before. And so this isn't to say that if there's people in your life who are vacuums that you should never interact with them. Sometimes that's just not possible to do. But figure out who those people are in each of those categories and make a conscious effort to include those battery people in your regular interactions. The thing we can do to help protect our social rest is set boundaries. Being willing to say no to social commitments that you just don't have the bandwidth for. You don't always have to have any big excuse to turn down plans or turn down events with other people. If you are overwhelmed and you have kind of run your social battery dry for that particular day or that particular week, set boundaries and say no. Not having the bandwidth to do it is a valid enough excuse to give yourself a break. The last thing we can do under this umbrella is taking time away from social media. We live in a day and age where we're kind of constantly connected and constantly bombarded with other people's lives and other people's communication. And so sometimes just taking some time away from that. Maybe take a day where you don't spend any time on your phone at all. Maybe put your phone on do not disturb for most parts of the day. Don't feel like you need to make yourself readily available 24/7. You don't owe that to other people. You are allowed to just turn that area of your life off for a chunk of time. Something I do to help protect my own social rest is anytime I am not within work hours when, people from work might be trying to contact me, I keep my phone on do not disturb. And so when I'm ready to go and check notifications and respond to texts and respond to calls and things like that, I can go in and check them and do so when I'm ready, but I'm not getting bombarded with them all day, every day. The next type of rest is creative rest. And this is kind of taking that moment to recharge that part of you that needs inspiration and wonder and innovation and that ability to just play and have fun. I think leaning into our creative side and leaning into our kind of playful, fun side is something that can be really easy to lose as we age if we don't make a conscious effort to keep it around, because it's not really an area of our lives that gets praised as much as that productive, get things done kind of area. And so it can be really easy to not make it a priority because what's the end goal? What's the payoff can kind of be the thought process, where that's not really the point. When it comes to creativity and having fun, you just being present and enjoying it and being happy is kind of the point. There doesn't have to be some end goal. This doesn't have to be for some larger purpose. It can solely just be for your own creativity and fun. So some signs that you might be needing more rest in this particular area can be feelings of being really uninspired, feeling really stuck, feeling like you're not able to come up with any new ideas, finding it really hard to be creative. So some things we can do to help remedy this. The first thing you can do is to expose yourself to beauty and creativity. So art, music, plays, going out and spending time in nature, even just rearranging the furniture in your space. Small moments of self-expression and creativity and changing your environment can help kind of get that creative ball rolling and help you kind of lean more into that headspace. The next thing you can do is create without any fixed outcome. Like I just mentioned, creativity doesn't have to be for some end goal. So allow yourself time to do things like journal or paint or cook, not for any end goal, not to try and create something meaningful, not to try and create some product that you can sell, not to try and make some fancy gourmet dinner, not for anything like that. Just to experiment and just to have fun. Even if you paint a painting and end up throwing it out, even if you cook a meal that ends up being not very good and you don't actually eat it, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is you being creative and just having fun. The next thing we can do, and this kind of goes hand in hand with taking a break from social media, but take a break from consuming. So when we kind of get caught, scrolling on social media and taking in all of the things that other people have created, it doesn't really allow us any time for our mind to actually wander and come up with its own ideas. And so allowing yourself the time to put that away and just be in silence and give your mind that time to kind of run on its own and come up with new ideas can be really helpful for fostering creative rest. The last thing you can do is change your environment. And so, like I mentioned before, you could rearrange the furniture in your space. If you work from home, maybe go work in a coffee shop for the day. If you are trying to write a book or a play and you typically write at home, maybe go to a park. Just change up your environment in some sort of way, because having that change in scenery can sometimes be enough to kind of replenish your creative stores and get the ball rolling. The next one is sensory rest. And this can come from us being just kind of constantly bombarded with sources of stimulation, bright lights, bright noises, social media, people all around us, and it can create this sense of being really overstimulated. And so if you find yourself being really irritable or just kind of craving that quiet darkness over, all of the things coming at you all at once, it's a sense that you might need some sensory rest. And so some things you can do to prioritize that, again, taking a break from social media. Put it down for a while. Allow yourself to just sit in the present moment instead of constantly taking in everybody else's lives. The next thing to help with this is allow yourself some quiet time. And I think this is something we don't do a whole lot anymore, primarily because we don't have to. There's never really any obligation for us to just sit in silence or allow ourselves to be bored, because there's a million things we can do nowadays to fill that space. And so we often don't have a lot of moments of actual true quiet time. So actively having a practice of setting aside time for you to truly do nothing, sit in silence, close your eyes, and just have a moment of nothingness. It can be enough to kind of help calm that sense of overstimulation. Next thing you can do is soften your environment. So take steps to make your environment a little bit less stimulating. So this can include things like dimming the lights. This could be putting on some calm music in the background. This could be cleaning up your space so it's not so cluttered. There isn't so many things for you to look at. And just making your whole environment less overstimulating to be in. Because sometimes when we're already really overstimulated and there's so much going on in our external world, just those little elements in the environment around you can be enough to stifle that sensory rest that you need. And the last one is emotional rest. And this is taking the time to rest from feelings of emotional strain and allowing yourself to just be authentically you. And someone who may need that emotional rest could be people that get caught up in a lot of people pleasing and maybe don't put their own authentic feelings and needs on top of the priority list and are instead kind of putting everything else first. Or people who are suppressing their emotions and kind of always holding it together and never really express how they're feeling can create a situation where you are really kind of desperately in need of that emotional rest because you've never had the chance to just truly and honestly let it out. And so things we can do to help improve our emotional rest include talking it out, truly, not sugarcoating it, not trying to cover it up and act like things are fine when they're not, but truly talking out what is going on. Find people in your life that are going to allow you to have that really open dialogue and just be authentically you without judgment, without trying to fix the problem, just hearing out where you're at. And if you have a hard time expressing this to other people in conversation, this can also be done through journaling. So you can just write all of your feelings down really honestly, really just pour it all out on the page how you're feeling and allow those thoughts to exist somewhere outside of your mind. And the last two things I want you to do to help prioritize your emotional rest, and again, these are both things that take practice. This is not something that you're going to master overnight if it's something that you struggle with, but this is saying no when you need to and practicing vulnerability. And so taking moments to try and be more authentically you and share what you are truly feeling, share what you are truly thinking, not trying to cover it up to be liked, not trying to be someone that you're not in order to fit into a mold, not saying yes when you don't really want to say yes. Practice saying what you truly mean, saying how you truly feel, and sharing those thoughts and feelings with the people around you. It will be a constant practice, but you being able to do that more often will help protect your emotional well-being and will help prevent a situation where you are kind of in dire need of this emotional rest. So those are some simple steps we can take to kind of help address all of those facets of rest and recovery, because sometimes it's not just about getting more sleep. Sometimes we need to really prioritize these other facets of our emotional well-being in order to truly feel rested. Because you can get enough sleep, but if one of these other areas is missing, you may still find yourself feeling really exhausted and burnt out, and you continuing to just get more sleep is not necessarily the solution. Another thing I want to talk about as it relates to rest is your diet. And this is something that I think maybe people don't initially think about when it comes to rest and recovery, but there are ways that we can reframe our diet in order to help kind of protect our emotional well-being during those stressful times. So I'm going to give you some kind of simple examples of things you can do for your diet. So the first thing you can do is prioritize eating foods that are high in tryptophan. And the reason for this is that tryptophan can help calm your mood and promote deeper rest. So foods that are high in tryptophan can include things like pistachios, peanut butter, cashews, pumpkin seeds, chicken, turkey, fish, eggs, and dairy. The next thing we can do is prioritize foods that are high in magnesium. Magnesium will help relax the nervous system and help relieve stress and tension. And if you're someone whose magnesium levels are actually a little bit deficient, you prioritizing magnesium can actually improve your sleep as well. And so these can all kind of feed into each other to help leave you feeling more rested and recharged. So foods that you can eat that are high in magnesium can include almonds, chia seeds, whole wheat, spinach, quinoa, Swiss chard, dark chocolate, black beans, edamame, and avocado. The next thing we can prioritize is foods high in vitamin C. And so this can help regulate cortisol during times of high stress. And another kind of add-on to this is vitamin C will also help support our immune system, because when we are repeatedly exposed to periods of really high stress and overwhelm, your body is busy dealing with that stress, which can actually lower your immune function a little bit. And so your risk of getting sick goes up. So you prioritizing foods high in vitamin C can also help protect you against getting sick during those times. So foods that you can prioritize high in vitamin C include kale, blueberries, strawberries, kiwi, citrus fruits like oranges and grapefruit, red and green bell peppers, tomatoes, and cantaloupe. The next thing we can prioritize is foods high in potassium. And the reason for this is that foods that are high in potassium will help with electrolyte regulation, which can help regulate stress signals. Foods high in potassium can include potatoes, bananas, avocados, sweet potatoes, leafy greens like spinach, beans, lentils, and dairy products such as milk and yogurt. The next thing we can prioritize in our diet is vitamin B12. And the reason for this is that it will help support nervous system function, as well as dopamine and serotonin production to help with mood regulation. Foods high in B12 can include yogurt, sardines, shellfish, eggs, organ meats such as beef liver, clams, salmon, tuna, and cheese. And if you are someone who is vegan or vegetarian and may have a harder time getting these things in your diet, nutritional yeast is also really high in B12. It's a seasoning that you can add to your food. I would recommend making that a staple in your diet if you are someone who does not regularly eat animal products. The next thing we can prioritize is iron-rich foods, and this is because it can help with oxygen delivery to the brain and can also help support the synthesis of key neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. Foods high in iron can include organ meats, red meat, seafood, fortified cereals, beans, lentils, tofu, dark leafy green vegetables like spinach or kale, and nuts and seeds. The last one that I want you to prioritize in your diet when you're feeling particularly stressed and overwhelmed is omega-3 fatty acids. And the reason for that is that omega-3 can help reduce stress by modulating the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis. This can help lower inflammatory markers and can help increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which is associated with better mood regulation. Foods high in omega-3 can include fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, or sardines, flaxseed, chia seed, walnuts, olive oil, soybeans, edamame, and kidney beans. I think sometimes we may not consider our diet as being a source of mental rest and recovery, but it is. The way that you structure your diet is not just going to have an impact on your physical well-being, but it's going to have an impact on your mental well-being as well. A quote that I love on this topic comes from Dr. Mark Hyman, and he says that every bite is information to the body. Choose foods that whisper calm, not chaos. And the last thing I want to talk about during this episode that I think we've touched on a little bit here and there, but I think it deserves its own kind of category, is using gratitude as a form of recovery. And again, kind of similar to the discussion on diet, gratitude may not be an area that you would think of for your mental rest and recovery. I think we think of it a lot as like a regular practice to help support our well-being, but it can really help serve as a tool for rest and recovery when we are faced with those moments of stress and overwhelm and burnout. It is not just this kind of feel-good concept. It can be a recovery practice that'll help kind of recharge your body, recharge your mind, and reset your nervous system. When we experience stress, burnout, or emotional exhaustion, our body goes into protection mode. Our nervous system can kind of stay stuck in this fight, flight, or freeze mode. And gratitude acts as a counter signal to that. So it can kind of help shut down that survival mode way of thinking and shift your body back into a state of safety and rest. There's a common thing that I've heard before that is the notion that you can't feel simultaneously grateful and anxious. And so having that gratitude practice can be a really simple tool to help take us out of that anxious survival mode mindset. A 2015 study published in Frontiers in Psychology found that gratitude activates areas of the brain linked to dopamine and serotonin, the same neurotransmitters that help us relax and recover. And so we can kind of trigger those neural pathways by implementing some sort of gratitude practice. Another study from UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center showed that people who practice gratitude regularly had an overall lower level of cortisol and better sleep quality over time. And according to Dr. Robert Emmons, who is one of the leading researchers on gratitude, gratitude can help block toxic emotions such as envy, resentment, and regret. Emotions that can destroy our happiness and drain our energy. And so having a regular gratitude practice can not only serve as recovery in the moments when we need it, but it can help prevent those moments of exhaustion, not just physical, but in all of those areas that we talked about before. So mental, spiritual, social, all of these areas can help be kind of preserved and strengthened by you having a regular gratitude practice. And it doesn't have to be super time consuming. This is something that is really easy to implement into your day-to-day routine. It's something that you don't have to devote a huge chunk of time to. So I'm going to go over some simple steps that we can take to help make this a regular practice in your day. The first thing that I want you to try and do is something called gratitude scanning. And this is something you can do in those moments when you're feeling really overwhelmed and really stressed. And it is just taking like a 60-second chunk of time, scan your environment and seek out 3 things in your kind of immediate vicinity that you are grateful for. Maybe it's the coffee that you're drinking. Maybe it's the sunlight coming through the windows in your car. Maybe it's the song that's playing on your radio. Maybe it's the shirt that you wore today because it's really comfortable and you feel really cute in it. It could be just those simple things. You just taking that moment of pause in a moment that feels really emotionally overwhelming and really emotionally charged and focusing your attention on things that you're grateful for can help bring you down from that really heightened anxiety state into a much calmer, reset frame of mind. The next thing I want you to do is something called the micro moment practice. And this is something that you can do right at the end of your day. So as you're getting into bed at the end of your day, I want you to take a moment and reflect on one thing that you were grateful for or one thing that went really well during the day. And again, this doesn't have to be something major. Maybe someone held the door for you today. Maybe that meeting at work that you were really stressed about went a little smoother than you expected. Maybe you had a really great interaction with a friend or a romantic partner today. Maybe you had a really nice warm bath after work and had a moment tonight to just decompress. Whatever it is, just focus on one small thing that you feel went really well and that you're grateful for from your day. This is a practice that I've heard talked about from Dr. Daniel Amen. Dr. Daniel Amen is a psychiatrist, brain health expert, and one of the most well-known voices in the mental wellness space today. He's the founder of the Amen Clinics, which specialize in using brain imaging, specifically SPECT scans, to better understand and treat mental health issues. And he talks about having a regular practice like this. He talks about every night when he's getting into bed, asking himself the question, what went well today? And he describes using this as kind of a treasure hunt for good moments throughout the day. Dr. Amen also studies gratitude as a regular practice as it relates to mental health and well-being. And his research suggests that focusing on gratitude helps calm the deep limbic or emotional areas of the brain and enhances the judgment centers. And so this isn't just, anecdotal evidence that us having some sort of gratitude practice makes us feel better. There is actually biological changes going on a cellular level that can be shown on brain scans when we have this sort of practice. The next thing you can do to implement gratitude into your day is something called a gratitude pause. So if you are going through something stressful or overwhelming and you catch yourself kind of spiraling and ruminating and stuck in ways of thinking that you maybe don't really want to be stuck in, take a moment and pause and ask yourself this question. What is one thing right now that's okay? And seek out one thing in this situation that is fine, that is doing totally okay, that you don't need to stress or worry about, and start focusing some of your attention on that. This is a really small habit, but it can help interrupt that anxiety or stress spiral and have you reframing your thinking in a way that's more productive. So these are just a few simple things you can add into your day, and every single one of them is really quick. It's something that takes maybe a couple minutes at most. So it's not a really difficult thing to implement into your day-to-day routine, but it's something that has a really profound difference. I'm going to give you a quote from David Steindl Rast, and he says, "It's not happiness that brings us gratitude. It's gratitude that brings us happiness." So on that note, I'm going to leave you with a challenge for the end of this podcast episode. I want you to take a moment right now and point out 3 things in your environment that you're grateful for. Maybe it's the device that you're listening to my voice on. Maybe it's the home that you're in right now that's keeping you warm. I don't know what the weather's like where you are right now, but it's been raining all day here, and I am certainly grateful to be somewhere warm and dry. Maybe it's the lights that are keeping the room lit up where you are right now. Maybe it's just the fact that you woke up today. It doesn't have to be major, but find 3 things. And with that, we have come to the end of part 3 of the Emotional Fitness series. Tune in next week. We will be diving into part 4 of the Emotional Fitness series, Cardio for the Mind, or Endurance. In that episode, we are going to be talking about training patience, emotional endurance, and building long-term optimism without toxic positivity. All right, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next week.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show. If you like the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, or share the show with a friend. Your support helps the show reach even more incredible people just like you. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time at the Mindset Gym.